Good afternoon. It's your big sister Amy, and I'm in the middle of making cut tomatoes, for a tomato pie, which we'll make later on, but it needs to sit for a couple of hours in some salt. But join me as I cut some tomatoes, and I think today I'm going to talk about loneliness. I know right now it's all in the news. It's an epidemic. It's everywhere. It's social media. And so I think loneliness, the term, is now the way that they're using it nowadays. It's a catch-all uh, for something else, for gathering of all the bullshit that we're doing today. I think it's because it's not just that we're lonely, but it was hard for us to find an authentic connection with another. Um, we have learned to deal with the artificial world, AI, the social media, the trends, all of that. Um, we've been learning to deal with the false personas, and we we're just tired of it, and we cannot find a good conversation. We can't find somebody who just wants to sit and just talk about her day. And that kind of sucks. But I wanted to dive in on something I, I found a couple of things, and I thought it was really interesting, and I wanted to share. The term loneliness was actually called just something else completely. It was simply called isolation, or um, sweet Lord, I'm just having a brain fart. Solitude. It was a spiritual journey. People would go out, we've heard of the terms in the Bible, he was out in the wilderness for 40 years. Well, he was in isolation for 40 years. Um, we hear of those terms. I mean, it's in books. It's in the very old books. But the term solitude literally meant, simply coming in from the wilderness, and whenever you're ready to connect with the world again, you simply came back to society and sat next to a campfire and just said, "You won't believe what I learned while out in the desert or in the forest or wherever it was that they were being a solitude, having a solitude, spiritual experience." That's all it was coming in from out of the cold. Um, Today, the definition has started to change, but it started to change more with the changing of our priorities, um, hundreds of, probably about 100 something years ago. So our priorities started changing, like right after the industrial age, whenever we started having more of a middle class and we had more of a disposable income. Used to be, people had homes just in random spots, and in little places here and there, and they had a front porch because everybody had a front porch, because that was where people would have their community around to have church, or have you know conversations, gossip, feasts, just anything that they wanted, they did on the front porch, because it was cooler on the porch. Because inside homes were much smaller and much more confining, and you can't fit a lot of people inside. So they would have everything on the front porch or in the front yard. And they had a lot more property where they had, you know, a garden in their backyard where they were growing food and stuff, and it looked cozy and homey. But that was a problem for, you know, people who wanted us to buy more, because they weren't getting financially fed, because you got to feed the beast, right? So one of the things that they did was, oh, let's change homes a little bit. So instead of having front porches, suddenly our priorities changed to suddenly having automobiles. And well, if you're going to have an automobile, you might as well buy a cute little home that has a garage. And oh no, it doesn't have a front porch, so you can't have friends come over because you're going to be too busy driving your car. And because you no longer had a yard, you can't grow a garden. And so, because you now have a car and you have a little disposable income, you could drive to the grocery store and get whatever it was that you wanted. Like, you needed tomatoes, you got tomatoes. Instead of getting tomatoes out of your yard, you go to drive to the store where you spent money. I mean, that's how it kind of changed. That's how our community started dissolving. It started dissolving steps long, long time ago before we were born. Um, and so our ancestors were like, this is really great. We now have a place to, you know, protect our investment. Well, by protecting their investment, they let go a little something of theirs. It was a trade off, which really sucks. So, but let's talk about something else. Also, long time ago, stories were full about isolation. Um, that's how we communicated. Like, um, we all heard the story of like Little Red Riding Hood. She was alone going to her grandmother's house. Well, yeah, there were stories about alone. It was task oriented. In Greek mythology, there are stories of isolation, of, Medusa. Medusa was a cute little girl, and she was in Athena's temple, and Poseidon saw her and said, hey, hey, hey. And suddenly, Athena got pissed off at this young girl and turned her into a gorgon simply because Poseidon was attracted to her. And so suddenly, this young girl was forced into isolation. Um, and then Atlas was the guy that held the world on his shoulders. So he felt it was his responsibility to do that. He didn't want his family members to do that. He didn't want his daughters to do that. And he felt it was responsible. It was his duty to assist the world in keeping it in place. And so he was isolated by his duty, by his need to be responsible. Um, and I had the last one. I made notes. Um, so anyway, so sorry, my phone was thing, but where was it? And Narcissus, he was the guy that fell in love with his own image. Um, and so he was, by sitting there beside the pool of water, he was starting to grow roots, but he wanted to be isolated. He wanted to be alone. But you find our modern our modern day similarities in those stories. The little girl who went to, the Red Riding Hood, she was, by herself, taking, on a journey. That's what we all do. We all are by ourselves doing our regular daily tasks. Um, that's a modern day equivalent of loneliness, and along with that story, with Medusa's story where she's forced into isolation. Well, we are forced into isolation by the things that we feel like we have to accomplish, we feel like we have to do, um, in which keep us from being significantly connecting significantly with our friends and our family. We feel like we have to do something, and we all are familiar with that. It could be, because of one situation or another, but it's significant to you. With Atlas, it was his, we equivalent that with work. We have to be responsible, and so we're alone at work, and we're tasked to do that. With Narcissus, it's all about pleasure and vanity, and he's wanting to be isolated. Well, we kind of do that to our own self by, and I'm thinking it's like with not social media, but playing video games, because we get all into our characters who we love, and the only way we can be these super duper cool characters in a game what we love, we have to isolate ourselves from the real world to be in our fake world. And those stories are how we are some modern day similarities, and I think that's sad. Um, but homesickness is also one of those things that's tied to loneliness, where we're in deep, need to seeing friends and family. So if you're a college kid in a dorm, or if you're just on a journey, or if you have just moved, you're missing the special people in your life. People who you have a true tie to. And I know it's difficult. I go on journeys all the time where I'm by myself, and I'm homesick. But the thing is that what you can do is do okay. So do what Mark Twain did, and so Mark Twain, he wrote a letter to his wife. He was at the time, Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens. He was essentially the superstar of his day. You could write him a letter, and he would, and put his name on the envelope. You didn't have to put an address. People simply knew where he was. Everybody knew where he was. If he was in England, they sent the letter to England. If he was in Louisiana, they sent it to Louisiana. If he was in New York, they sent the letter to New York. They simply knew where he was. If he was overseas, it would go overseas. But he was lonely, and the world's most popular man was missing his family. So he wrote his wife a letter saying, if I was home, I would want a feast that would last for days. And he made this long list of super, like, fanciful, meals that were just, some were non-existent nowadays. And like oysters and other very strange things. And so in the book, if you're a foodie, you would really like the story, because all of these cooks are learning about these foods, and they're making a modern day reinterpretation of those meals that he put in that note. And it's a great book. If you get a chance to get that. But he used his imagination to connect with his family. That's what eased his pain. But he didn't have social media. He didn't have any of that. He had telephones. He could probably call. But he was desperate enough to, make this very cool idea. But nowadays, I think that what we can do, and I'm going to flip my notes, 'cause I was writing my notes. What we can do is we need to have our own front porch experience. We need to reconnect with our neighbors. We need to take walks. So if you're lonely, if you don't want to be shoved into a situation like, forcing yourself to go to a club where you're forced to connect with others, and it honestly won't work, because you're going to feel even more estranged from yourself, and you're going to feel even more isolated, because everybody else is bouncing around acting like, you know whatever that they're doing, and you won't be able to connect or feel what they're experiencing. And so what you need to do simply is to just take a walk. Just go out and just wave and smile, and that's all you do. And soon your neighbors will wave and smile back, and conversations will flow. And soon you're getting to know your neighbors. Pretty soon you get to know another neighbor. Soon another neighbor. And then you have a common interest of what's going on in your neighborhood, and you're going to have a nice flow, in which you get to know people in your neighborhood, and you're going to have a small connection, and you're doing it on your own terms, where you're having control of the conversation of what you want to talk about. And I think in order for us to have that front porch experience that we're so desperately lacking, and what we so desperately need, because the fear is what's holding most of us back right now. Fear in ourselves, the term, what was it? Fear of missing out. And so they want us to be afraid, because fear is profit. If you're afraid of stuff, you're going to go out and buy stuff. That's how it works. So it and so if you're comparing yourselves to others from online, saying, that's super unhealthy, because most people online are all faking being authentic. They're all faking it. So know this, that what you're seeing is a comparison, and comparison is a thief of joy. You don't need to have that. You don't need to be absent of joy in your life. And joy is internal. It's meant, is what you find internal, and happiness is external, based upon situations and circumstances that bring you temporary happiness, bring you temporary feelings. But joy is a longer term, feeling of inner worth. So you need to have that. You need to have joy. Find it. Find it in yourself. Find it in your own studies. You'll find it. But you also need to be around community. Get to know your neighbors. It's so much better to know, who's around you. And I want you to have that feeling where you can trust who your neighbors are, because it's invaluable. It's so necessary. It's, if you are in need of anything, someone's going to assist you because they know you. Like, wasn't long ago, like, my mom fell and nobody was around, but one of my neighbors knew she was injured, and they knew to call me. So that's how invaluable, you know, neighbors are. If they help you out, like taking groceries out of your car if you have a broken leg, or if you just need help on homework, or you happen to know that your neighbor, used to fix computers, or are really good at crossword puzzles. Have a game night on your porch. Just connect. Find the simple pleasures of saying hello to somebody today, in your neighborhood, and I hope it comes to a good friendship, so that you can rely upon, and you can have just a little less loneliness in your life. And I want you to do that. And remember, what I said before, we're rehabbing the word loneliness. It's no longer, that it's the absence of authenticity. We're now on a quest for authentic connection. So go out. I'm giving you a quest. Go out and find an authentic connection in your neighborhood. So have an amazing day, and don't melt. It's Florida heat. All right, have a good one. Bye. Love you.